Okay, here we are. We are going to cover chapter 11 called Promises and Pitfalls of Reconstruction. Reconstruction, as we know, is the period after the Civil War where they rebuilt the South. After the Civil War devastated the South, the infrastructure meaning the bridges, the roads, the houses, etc., and so forth, that was completely destroyed in the South as a result of the Civil War. And so Reconstruction was that time period whereby they rebuilt the South and rebuilt the farms, the houses, what people did in society, all those kinds of things. Okay, that's really what I'm trying to do, get the image up here. I think this is helpful. Okay. This is an example of enfranchisement. You'll see this word, enfranchisement of African Americans. Have you ever heard the word enfranchisement? You know what that means? When people say disenfranchise,
No.
it has to do with voting.
Voting?
Yeah, voting, like the right to vote. Disenfranchisement is an effort by white society to keep Black folks from voting. They call it disenfranchisement. They did the same thing with women. Disenfranchisement, disenfranchisement, disenfranchisement. So I have here on the slide presentation, enfranchisement, which means giving African Americans the right to vote. The reason I said that was after the Civil War, part of Reconstruction was giving Blacks the ability to vote, but particularly Black males. Women would not be able to vote until 1920. Okay, one of the first things we're going to talk about is President Lincoln. President Lincoln, he was still alive in part of 1865, right after the Civil War. Lincoln was alive for a little while, then he was assassinated not too far into 1865, but he did see the war end, and he did see the North win the war. He had a plan called the 10% plan. And Lincoln's 10% plan caused a conflict between president and Congress over who was to set conditions of the South's readmission. So there was this conflict between Congress and Lincoln about who was in charge of telling the South what to do before they were allowed to come back into the United States of America. Let us remember that the South left, Southern states left the Union and started their own country. And Lincoln was like, y'all can't just come back into the country after y'all started a whole war. We want to set up certain parameters that we want to outline, that we want to see done before you can come back into the United States of America. Congress and the president were debating about who gets to set that criteria up. Here's the conflict. Lincoln's plan allowed states to be readmitted if 1/10 of eligible voters swore loyalty to the U.S. That's his 10% plan. So the voters had to say, when they came, Lincoln was afraid that if they got power, they would rebel again. So Lincoln said, buddy, 10%, 1/10 of voters needed to say that we're going to be loyal to the United States and accepted the abolition of slavery. Because after the Civil War, you still had a lot of people in the South that wanted to keep slaves. It was a long time before Kentucky, which is right by us here, accepted the fact that they had to let their slaves go. They were one of the last states. We live right by Kentucky. They were one of the last states to give up slavery. Yeah, even after the war, even after they had lost the war, the South had lost the war, they wanted to hold on to their slaves. But Lincoln said, y'all have to pledge loyalty to us, 10% of, and accept the fact that slavery was illegal. But he gave amnesty. Amnesty is a word that means a pardon to certain high-ranking civil and military officers. So Lincoln was a little bit generous. He gave a pardon to high-ranking Southern generals. Even though they had rebelled against the United States of America, he gave them pardons. The Congress disagreed. They said Lincoln was too lenient. They wanted to punish him even more. So that was a disagreement. They also disagreed over the status of freed people. Okay, so on to the next slide here. Andrew Johnson was the president that came after Lincoln was assassinated. Look at page 237, the bottom of page 237. The last paragraph where it says, from Congress's point of view. You see it? Mm-hmm. From Congress's viewpoint, the pendulum had swung too far toward the executive branch. That means they felt like the president had too much power. The executive branch was the president. The accession to the presidency of Andrew Johnson after the assassination of Lincoln only deepened the conflict between the two branches of government. So now you have Andrew Johnson. Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, middle of 1865. Andrew Johnson took over. He was a racist. Whenever you see Andrew Johnson's name, you automatically know he's a racist president. He was the opposite of Lincoln. He really was pro-slavery. He really didn't want to see the South lose. He really did not want African Americans to have any rights. But there was a conflict between the two branches after Andrew Johnson became president. Johnson wanted to leave Black suffrage up to the states. In other words, Johnson wanted to give states the ability to decide whether suffrage is another word for voting. So we have enfranchisement, we have suffrage. So you can see the word here up on my screen, suffrage. That means voting, okay? He wanted to leave it up to the states whether they wanted to allow Blacks to vote or not. Rather than passing a federal law and saying every African-American male should have the right to vote, he wanted to leave it up to the states, which was, wrong. Because the Southern states would never have given African-Americans the right to vote. A place like Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi. And so, and he began to dictate Reconstruction policy. So that was the debate. They didn't want the president to have all the power. He extended general amnesty, seen as a champion of the South. So Johnson was for the South. Black codes, okay? That's another term that I want to spell out here. In a nutshell, black codes were laws. You had them in the North too, but in this context, Southern states began to pass laws. They were upset that they lost the war. They were upset that African Americans had rights. So they began to pass laws to try to curb the freedom of African Americans. And they look just like slave codes. Slave codes, if you remember, you've heard that term before, were laws that restricted the freedom of slaves. After the Civil War, and when slavery became illegal, they still were trying to hold on to that prejudice and restrict Blacks, so they came up with black codes. Law, like loitering laws, and you can't be outside at a certain time, and it's really, from a spiritual standpoint, is of Satan. A lot of the, yes.
I was reading, I ain't reading very much, but where the enemy was just so evil.
Right.
I'm wondering, why was it that the white man was so, what made him so hate the black man? And to this day.
Right, to this day.
It's still an issue. It's just something I was reading and I just, these people were evil.
And they call it America's original sin. It really is slavery, racism, America's original sin. We still haven't dealt with it. And what is worse, it's okay when a worldly person, you know, it's not okay, but it makes sense when a worldly person is sinful. But when it's in the church, they should know better. A lot of these institutions and these ideas came out of the church, came out of white churches. I had a picture, I think I showed before in class, it might have not been this semester, of the Klan. Y'all ever showed you that picture of the KKK in the church? I'll have to pull it up. Remind me at the end of class, I'll find it. The KKK was in the church, in the pews, sitting next to the pastor. They were ingrained in a lot of the Southern churches.
They had on there.
Yes, they had on there everything. Sure did. I have to find a picture of it. I know. Yeah, remind me at the end. I do want to pull it up. Well, presidential Reconstruction in 1865, the South elected many Confederate leaders to represent them in Congress. So get this. During Reconstruction in the South, they took the leaders that were in charge of the Confederate States of America and put them in government. This is the reason why you still to this day have racism in high places, because it started way back then. You had governors that were sometimes Klansmen. You know, nowadays we still have police officers they finding out that are white supremacists. And it was a way to, okay, slavery is illegal, but we still gonna oppress the black man through laws now. And that's what happened. Thaddeus Stevens argues that Congress should take over Reconstruction. So there's that debate there. Congress takes charge. Conditions for free people were terrible. So even though slavery, one of the things we must understand, even though slavery was illegal now, it still was not easy for African Americans. Southern whites were waging a kind of guerrilla warfare on blacks. So there was this domestic warfare. Guerrilla basically means unorganized warfare, like little skirmishes to try to intimidate blacks. That's how the Klan came about. This is an example. In Florida, they would enslave free blacks. This is after slavery. They would enslave African Americans to get them to pay off a debt. So it's a way of, they were trying to find ways to keep slavery going. That's what this image is all about here on my screen. More on Reconstruction. In 1866, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act over Johnson's veto. You still have this fight going on between Congress and the president. Because our government, remember, is supposed to be 3 equal branches of power. The president is not supposed to be more powerful than Congress. You have the executive branch, you have the executive, judicial, this is probably sound familiar, and the legislative. 3 branches of government. They're all supposed to be equal in power. But everybody always looks at the president as the boss. But the way our government is set up, it's not supposed to be one person in power. President, Supreme Court here, Congress, okay? They're all supposed to be equal in power. You have this fight going on between the Congress and the president about who should set the rules for Reconstruction. The different northern interests began to promote the enfranchisement of the blacks. So at this particular time in the North, they began to really push for voting rights of blacks. The fight between Congress and the president continued. Where we're going is to a Johnson impeachment. That's where we're going to end up. Johnson was the only, there was only 3 people that were impeached. They almost impeached Nixon, but he quit before they impeached him. When we've, of course, made history with Trump. But, right. So Johnson was the first one to be impeached, and then Clinton, and then Trump twice. And so Johnson eventually was repudiated at polls because of his conduct. People didn't vote for him. So let me move on here. Under Reconstruction, the Black conventions. So if you want a page number for this, this is.
I need to write down.
Page 240. I can send you this PowerPoint.
Okay. Johnson was, okay, does it have any legal conceit?
We haven't gotten to that part yet. Okay. I was just jumping ahead of myself.
Okay, I was just wondering.
They may not say it. I'll have to see. But so they had Black conventions. Blacks were becoming politically mobilized against the president. It reminds me a lot of Trump. A lot of the history repeats itself. There were statewide conventions in the South in 1865 to 1866. Keep in mind that the Civil War ended in 1865, so we're still right after the Civil War. Black mobilization, churches were involved in a lot of the political activism, speaking out against injustice. Fraternal societies, that's basically your Freemasons, et cetera, and so forth. But the churches were involved in a lot of these movements to speak out against the injustice. Okay, so I'll just move on. Right, in 1867, you had radical Reconstruction, the Reconstruction Act of 1867. The ex-Confederate states divided into 5 military districts under martial law. So they put the Confederate states into districts instead of there being states. Right after the Civil War, people were concerned that they would rebel. So the president and Congress sent military down there to police them. Each state were required to hold a constitutional convention based on universal male suffrage. That means all males can vote, because it used to be that only rich white males can vote. All states were required to ratify the 14th Amendment before admittance. The 14th Amendment gave African Americans citizenship, Black male citizenship.
Male.
Yes, because look, that's a great question. Look what I put here. Some condemned gendered language. They fought for universal suffrage. They were advocating for universal male suffrage and left the women out. People were critical of that. So what about the women? Women wouldn't get to vote until 1920. This is this radical Reconstruction period. There was a new national officials. The 15th Amendment officially gave Black males to vote. Okay, created a political electorate in the former Confederacy. By the way, this has been recorded, so you can go back and if you want to, go back and listen to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And
how can I
I'm gonna email it. I'm gonna text it to you just like I do the ones from church. You'll have this. 2 African Americans sent to the U.S. Senate. So this was a really a wonderful time for African Americans, but it wouldn't last. 20 Blacks served in the U.S. House between 1877 to 1901. A lot of people were resentful for that because of that, of course. These were the first Black senators and representatives in the 41st and the 42nd Congress of the United States. This is page 244. One of the major manifestations of citizens, look under the caption of that picture on page 244. One major manifestation of citizenship was sending persons, some former slaves, to Congress. Shown here are some of the first African Americans elected to Senate and the House of Representatives of the US Congress. So at first, how shall I say this? Right after the Civil War during Reconstruction, Blacks made wonderful advances politically, socially, but it didn't last, because what's going to happen is the white supremacist spirit is going to rise again. It's going to undo all of that. Those Confederate generals that were put in leadership, they're going to fight with that hateful spirit. It is so insidious that Satan will put it in some white folks' heart, not all of them, to just hate African American and not like progress when they see us trying to do better. They feel intimidated, or, you know, and it's all you can say ain't nothing but the devil. Yeah. Yeah. All through history. That's why I open with that scripture, Ethiopia shall soon stretch out their hand, because God has blessed us. The first shall be last, last shall be first. He sees the oppressed, just like he saw the children of Israel down in Egypt land. He saw them being oppressed. The Lord sent Moses down there. Same with us. We have our Harriet Tubman, our Martin Luther King, and different ones. So Blacks as state legislators, we were just talking about this. African Americans served with varying success as state legislators. They wielded the greatest influence in South Carolina. So way back in the 1860s, you had African Americans legislators in South Carolina. The Union League became spearhead for Southern Republicanism. Let me move forward here. Black women in the Black community. I like this. Remember, we're in the 1860s, 1870s. Black women were organizing a Get Out to Vote campaign and vocal in the political discussion. Let's look at page 247. We can read a little bit about this. This is interesting. Black women also, the second full paragraph, Black women also played a role in getting out the vote and in shaping political decisions in their community. Although Black women, like all American women, could not vote, they did not remain silent during the electoral campaign. A New York Times reporter noted the presence of Black women in the audience at local Republican and state constitutional conventions in October 1867. He noticed their presence there. He and other observers stated that in contrast to white women who were quiet spectators at political meetings, Black women shouted from the balconies, forcing their voices into the debates. As historian Elsa Barkley Brown has pointed out, African-American women in Virginia, Mississippi, South Carolina, and elsewhere understood themselves to have a vital stake in African-American men's franchise. Remember, franchise means vote. The fact that only men could exercise the franchise did not mean that women remained silent or unaware of the power of the vote. So I love reading stuff like that. That's so fascinating. It's inspiring. The Civil Rights Act of 1875, back to my slide presentation, the Civil Rights Act of 1875 clarified the rights of African Americans to freely use public accommodations. So that started the early fight against Jim Crow and segregated bathrooms and streetcars and et cetera and so forth. There was a woman named Sarah Fawcett. Sarah, let me pull that up. I just recently did an article. Sarah Merritt, she was from Cincinnati. And she was the first woman, she desegregated. Here it is right here. If you type in Sarah Fawcett, David Childs, I did an article on it recently. Sarah Marion Fawcett. And this woman here was one of the first ones to desegregate the streetcars in Cincinnati, the public transportation. She integrated them. This is what they used to look like. She was an early Rosa Parks. She refused to give up her seat. They physically threw her off the bus. Can you imagine how evil? They physically, the white conductor threw her off the bus. She sued them and won and got all of the streetcars in Cincinnati, in our city, integrated. So much history. So much history. This is the work I did for NPR, Cincinnati Public Radio. This is one of the articles I did.
That is amazing.
Yeah. So the fight, one of the things we're learning, the fight didn't just start. Right. Oh, we didn't learn that at all in Harrison or Garfield at all. This is what I'm referring to here. So you can go back and also see this recorded as well. Let me move on here. Sarah Fawcett. Oh, you want me to pull it back up?
No, I just want to write that name and that.
Yeah, Sarah Marion Fawcett. And also, this is the work I'll be doing for Cincinnati Museum Center. I'm going to be talking about her work and this material here. Okay, so let me pick up where I left off here. So that's fascinating. Okay, slide 14. Robert Brown Elliot was another important person that was elected to Congress. He's speaking before Congress. So again, early on, just fascinating history that we get to experience, or that we never experienced. We never had a chance to learn about. The social consequences of the war. The Freebies Bureau was responsible for relief and rehabilitation programs for the newly emancipated. You want to know about the Freebies Bureau? Yeah, the Freebies Bureau was an organization, this on page 248, they were responsible for the well-being and the success and the welfare of the newly freed Blacks. Think about this. Before 1865, before the end of the Civil War, you had millions of African Americans in the South that had been slaves. A lot of them couldn't read. They weren't allowed to read. They never had a job. They were just enslaved African Americans. Never had a whole lot of skills. Many did. I don't want to mischaracterize, but they did not know how to function as citizens. All of a sudden, with the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States, the 14th Amendment, that gave African Americans citizenship, and then the 15th Amendment enfranchised Black males. All of those were passed in 1865, right after the Civil War. All of a sudden, they had all these rights, but they needed to be supported. So the Freebies Bureau, it was their responsibility to see that it was done. They were a government organization. They were responsible for relief, and if you, I got kind of some notes up here you can maybe reference. They were responsible for relief and rehabilitation programs for the newly emancipated, the free people that were newly free. They provided food, medical services. They established schools, the Freebies Bureau, supervised contracts, managed the land. First large-scale federal welfare program. It was a large welfare program all over the South to help the newly freed Blacks. They played a key role of education. They hired teachers. Most of the teachers, the reason you have, to this day, most teachers are women and white women, was from this time period. Teachers used to be mostly males. But during this time period, the Reconstruction, they hired a lot of Northern single white women who were not married to go down to the South and teach the ex-enslaved Blacks. To this day, it's a largely feminine field, women field, white women, because of this historical moment. Most saw education as the key, and rightly so. They saw we need to educate people. Still, one of the most important aspects of the Black experience and Black history should be education. Nowadays, people associate Black people with negativity, rap, hip hop, violence, drugs. But one of the things that has always been associated with our community is education. So institutions like Temple Bible College are really important. We really a part of that whole legacy that goes back to this time period of Black educational institutions. The Freebies Bureau worked with private Northern organizations and established Black educators. Okay, educators, Black and white, teachers came from the North. I got ahead of myself. Many were missionaries. The number of Black teachers steadily increased. You also had a lot of Black teachers way back in the 1860s and 1870s that came from the North to teach the slaves. So again, that whole tradition of Black education, we have a long history of it. By 1870, the task of education completely transferred to local communities and religious organizations. So the Black church, this is a lot of my doctoral dissertations dealt with this. The Black church was one of the major institutions that managed the education of African Americans. The Black church has long been one of the original places where African Americans could get an education. Even in the South before the Civil War, when it was illegal for African Americans to go to school. And even in the North, when schools were segregated, we weren't allowed to go to the white schools, the church played a major role. So we are right in historical and Bible order at Antioch when we are providing education for the people. Sunday school played a role, one of the biggest roles, arguably, in educating African Americans. Because not only did Sunday school give us a Bible education, more importantly, but it also played a role on reading, writing, and arithmetic. A lot of people learn how to read in Sunday school because they weren't allowed to go to the mainstream schools. So the pastor said, well, we're going to do it right here.
Yeah. That's where Sunday school
came from, exactly. And Sunday schools go back to the 1700s. And so when Pastor Childs, when Superintendent Childs used to say, the Sunday school is the church institution, the plant bed of the church, he ain't know what he was talking. I mean, he had no idea how right he was. Let me just put it like that. A lot of history behind that. And I remember Superintendent Childs, my former pastor, to the people that's listening, he was crazy about Sunday school. He did not want to give up that Sunday school. That's why even in the pandemic, I keep saying we're gonna get back to Sunday school. It's the establishment of the church. It's an institution. It comes back to this time period. The Black church offered, so back to my slide here, the Black church offered spiritual and material relief. Material relief means it taught them how to look at contracts. It served as a court of law. People could get married now because it used to be illegal in many southern states for Blacks to get married. Now all of a sudden we can legally get married. It's the first social institution. Look at this. I can't really overstate this. This is one of the most important sentences for this whole lecture. The African American church was the first social institution fully controlled by Blacks. In other words, the church, the Black church. In other words, you had schools that were funded by whites. And you might have a Black principal, you might have a Black superintendent, but it was controlled by whites. You might have a hospital, you might have a library, but they were predominantly controlled by whites. Universities, but the Black church, particularly the AME church, African Methodist Episcopal Church, was the first church or organization, first organization in general that was completely owned and controlled by Blacks. That's why Temple Bible College is so important. That's why Antioch is so important. Institutions like First Antioch.
Can you go back on offer spiritual and material relief? What are some of the things? Material relief.
Okay, material relief, food, clothes, shelter, education. You know, material relief also means that, like, yeah, public assistance.
And you said.
Oh, I was talking. Yeah.
You said. What was it said? Legal.
Legal, yeah, legal, right. Legal help, legal assistance, assistance with marriage, legal disputes, contracts.
Contracts.
And helping with contracts.
Yeah.
A lot of times they couldn't read, so you had people representing them to read contracts so they wouldn't get taken advantage of.
Right.
There was an economic adjustment. This is important too. When African Americans gained their freedom, they had been used to, in the South, working for free.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, they had to, it was a blessing and a curse because now they had to take care of themselves. The benefit was, obviously we didn't want to be slaves, but the welfare of, the well-being and welfare of African Americans was taken care of by the slave master, food, clothing, shelter. But now they had to take care of themselves. They didn't know how to do that. So there was an economic adjustment. And that's what I'm saying here in my slide. There was a desire for land because land ownership was wealth. Ex-slaves resisted signing labor contracts, fearing a new form of enslavement. They saw land ownership as a source of economic independence. Land ownership considered more favorable than wage labor. So again, wealth was connected to land ownership. The Southern Homestead Act of 1866, here in my slide, Blacks still prevented from land ownership. White hostility, they did not want Blacks to have land.
Right.
By 1870s, many abandoned land ownership dreams to move to urban centers. So they left the South, they left the rural areas because it was too hostile to look for work in the city. Women in the labor market, the attempt to withdraw Black females and children from labor market had economic consequences. They contributed to the decline in per capita production. That means there was a movement to try to get women and children out of the labor market. In other words, taking jobs from them. But they automatically saw that they needed more workers as soon as they did that. They saw that it was a mistake. They needed women and children to keep up with the demand for work.
Now, what does that mean, per capita production?
Per capita production means they were producing less in the economy. Just like now, think about now, when you go to the grocery store, we have a per capita production problem now. You go to the store, you can't hardly find milk. I don't know if you noticed, certain things you can't even find that you used to be able to find a lot of. That's just an example. Okay. Milk is toilet paper, for example. Mm-hmm. Do you remember, I don't know if you experienced this, but yeah, there's a lot of different things. Like even we just now were able to find Ice Mountain water after like a week. That's because we have a per capita problem. Enough is not being produced, keep up with the demand. Mm-hmm. And so that's what happened back in the 1860s and during Reconstruction when they tried to take women and children out of the labor market. There wasn't enough product produced. That's what per capita means. That's what that per capita production. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Black males took on a new assertive role as representatives of their family. So this allowed, after slavery was abolished, it allowed males to assume their God-given role as head of the household, because slavery undermined Black male authority. The slave masters embarrassed them and, couldn't be a husband. Mm-hmm. Many whites did not think Black women should have the same fashion and leisure styles as whites. So that's just more prejudice Let me wrap this up too. I got a couple more I want to go over. Majority of Black women, however, work primarily in the fields. The changing conditions of farm labor. Blacks resisted conditions placed on agricultural workers. Overall, per capita labor hours reduced by 1/3. So what that means is, well, let me read this too. Incentives and flexibility were provided to Blacks to meet urgent labor needs. In summary, you went from a slave economy to a worker economy. Remember, Mother Child used to say they worked from sun up to sundown. Slaves, that was the enslaved Black hours. You worked until the master said stop. But now you had free people, and so they could kind of challenge that and say, no, we're only gonna work for 8 hours. That's the reduced hours, because slaves often work themselves to death.
I think the economy probably was really all messed up whenever the slaves became free, because the slave owners were used to using them without pay. They didn't have to pay them. And they were able to produce. And to they the one that kept the economy in the South anyway.
You're right.
In the South.
You are summarizing the economic devastation of the South after the Civil War. That is a great, you have a good understanding. That is one of the most important things you need to understand about the effects of the South losing the Civil War. People became incredibly wealthy off of slave labor.
Right.
Like on the level of Bill Gates now. It was men in the South based on free labor. Imagine if you had a company and you didn't have to pay anybody. You could have 50 people, you didn't have to pay them. You know, whatever business you want to go into, whether it's drywall, let's take drywall.
Right.
Imagine if we had a drywall business still, and we had 50 people that knew how to do drywall, and all we do is sit back and collect all the money.
Right.
So you have people in the South getting, it was a wicked system. That's why it didn't last.
Yeah.
You had, and it was almost like drug money, like the mafia, you know? Exactly. Drug dealers don't live a long life because they are engaged in illegal activity and the money is not blessed. Right. So that's what happened in the South. So now that you take that free labor away, a lot of them went bankrupt. The farms went bankrupt. Wow. The crops were overgrown. They no longer, all of a sudden, they didn't have 100 people to do all that stuff for them. So the South was devastated. Sharecropping.
And they had all these free slaves that they had to find some kind of way to help them.
Exactly. So that was the role of the Freebies Bureau.
Right.
Mother Child's, that's okay. Mother Child Senior talks about sharecropping. I'm glad that we got to this because we're getting into our own history now. After slavery, I'm just gonna summarize this. Whites were interested, Southern whites were interested in holding on to the subjugation of Blacks at any cost. They were upset that African Americans were free, so they began to try to invent systems to perpetuate slavery. Sharecropping was one of them. It's called economic slavery. What happened was Black people, free people, they kept working the land, but they were supposed to be getting paid. Right. But the white owners manipulated them. They never did really get paid. They stayed in debt. Right. And Mother Child was under that system all the way till probably the 50s and 60s when she came up north. So that's what she talks about.
Now it wasn't that they would work all year.
Yeah.
And didn't they have, let me see now. Didn't they work for the slave owners? But they were allowed to also work their crops.
Right. But they were renting.
When they took it to market, okay, let me see now. I'm trying to remember this. They had their own crops. When they took them to market, but they still owe the white people.
Yeah.
And so they were trying to pay the white man off.
Mm-hmm.
But when they took their crops to market, it was always under.
Under, because they couldn't read. They often couldn't do the math. Yeah.
And then, like you said, the white man, the slave owners manipulated them.
Kept them in debt. You got it. You have an understanding of it. And furthermore, they were just renting. They didn't own the land.
Right.
They were renting.
Right.
Looking at the slide here, sharecropping, a compromise between planters' need for stability and control over agricultural production and free people. So the closest thing to slavery for the white planters, they needed the labor. They also wanted to control the farming. They didn't want to give blacks that power, and they wanted to control free black people. So that's what sharecropping was all about. Need for less risk and economic compensation. It was a flawed system. Most sharecroppers assumed great debt due to the cost of maintenance. That's what you just said. They got into a lot of debt. Under this system, white South recovered more quickly than free blacks. The Freedmen's Bank, chartered by the federal government for use by blacks, encouraged blacks to save money. Some of its financiers acted unscrupulously. In other words, they treated them unfairly. This is on page 255, by the way. It talks about that. Frederick Douglass was unable to save it. By 1874, the Freedmen's Bank closed. It was a bank designed just for black people. So this stuff we talk about, economic empowerment in the black community, is an old conversation. So we had our own banks to support us, but it wasn't supported. Reconstruction soon ends, and it results in, back to the slide presentation, it results in a reign of violence from the Klan. That's where you get into the Klan. What usually happens is when African Americans make progress, it invokes like what they call a white rage. A spirit of racism really rears its ugly head. That's what happened after Obama. They were so upset that we had a black president, and he gonna somehow give black people unfair treatment, even though they had white presidents most of the history. We get one black president, and they say, "Oh, he gonna favor blacks." They were so upset that they put Trump in office, and then we saw the rise of white supremacy. We saw the rise of people going into churches, black churches killing people. That's a pattern we see in history. Same thing that happened during this time. They were so upset that African Americans made all these gains, they're in Congress, et cetera, and so forth. It triggered violence. The Democratic Party, which back then was equivalent to the Republican Party now, revived in the South after general amnesty given to most ex-Confederates. Because Lincoln was lenient, he put all of the people the leaders that caused the rebellion were put back in leadership. And so it was just a matter of time. Lincoln, if you remember, Congress felt like he was being too lenient.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, there was the conflict. Lincoln plan allowed states to be readmitted if 1/10 of eligible voters swore loyalty to the US, and they also accepted abolition of slavery. He gave general amnesty to certain high-ranking civil and military officers. Right. And he was criticized by some in Congress for being too lenient. So we can't put it all on Johnson. Right. Lincoln was being a politician. He was compromising. So that's something that I have forgotten. You know, I like going over this stuff because it reminds me of things. There was a reign of violence as a result. White supremacist secret societies grew. This is the rise of the Klan. They use legal and extra legal, that means illegal, means to deny blacks equality. Kamalias and the Klan, Kamalias was another KKK type group that most people don't know about. Right. They're the most powerful. They use violence as a means to stop blacks from participating in politics. Let's remember, the definition of terrorism is using violence to achieve political gain. The definition of terrorism is using violence to bring about political gain. the definition of terrorism is using violence to bring about political gain. When we think about terrorists, we often think about Al-Qaeda, the Middle Eastern, terrorism is using violence to bring about political gain. Often when we think about terrorism, we think about the Iraqis, the Islamic terrorists, but the worst terrorists in the United States have been the KKK and the white supremacist group. They've done more damage and murder and violence in the United States than Al-Qaeda ever did. But it was particularly against blacks, and when something happens to blacks, people don't count that. Okay, so let me wrap up. Efforts to outlaw organization, Reconstruction ended. There were efforts.
Terrorism, I'm sorry.
Huh?
That's no terrorism.
Oh, Terror, like terror, Terrorism. Terrorism. Now, that's okay. Efforts to outlaw organizations that stop the violence were unsuccessful. I don't think they tried hard enough. Efforts to stop the Klan. Society had success in influencing politics, Mississippi, Louisiana, South Carolina. Despite black defiance to the intimidation, blacks began to stay at home, and political power shifted to the Democrats. They were successful in stopping the black vote. The KKK, one of their primary roles in a democracy was to disenfranchise blacks, to stop the vote. Because they knew that if black folks voted, they could put black people in power. That's how Obama got in power. That's how we have the black senators now.
And that's why, one reason why our president,
Joe Biden or Trump.
Biden got in office because
the black vote.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
They knew, the Klan understood that if black people got out to vote, we would have a Kamala Harris, black woman vice president. Oh my goodness, here go the world going to end, you know? So what they did, again, terrorism, the definition is using violence to achieve political gain. They used violence and it worked. Black people stayed at home, they didn't vote. So Democrats rose back to power. Back then, the Democrats were the racist party. Corruption in government. I'm not gonna go too much into this. Corruption in Republican governments, Republican corruption hastened the end of radical Reconstruction. Following deaths of old anti-slavery leaders, Republican Party headed in a new direction. Supreme Court decisions. In 1875, Supreme Court decisions weakened black voting rights. United States versus Cruikshank and United States versus Reese. And I'm gonna go to my last slide here. Campaign of 1876. This is Reconstruction ending. Controversy over who won 1876 election led to the formation of a commission charged with deciding the presidency. To break impasse, Republicans promised to withdraw troops, assist South with obtaining federal subsidies, and allow for better representation in Washington. There was a compromise during the 1876 campaign. Rutherford B. Hayes declared the winner. They withdrew federal troops while Congress removed other restrictions. In other words, the end of Reconstruction undid a lot of the gains that blacks had made. And so you had a racist country again. So that's all I want to share for today on this presentation. I'm going to end the PowerPoint right here, and you can come back and listen to it at your own leisure.
So